This episode of Let's Dig Deeper podcast is supported by the University of Copenhagen's School of Archaeology. Welcome, dear listener, to Let's Dig Deeper, the podcast where we talk all about archaeology, history, art, and culture. My name is Zinat Haroun. I am a student of classical archaeology here at the University of Copenhagen, and in this podcast, I'm going to take you along for interviews with some of the amazing people working in the field. We'll talk with archaeologists, historians, professionals, and beyond. Hopefully, we'll learn more about the past in the process. And today, I'm joined by two amazing guests, archaeologists and lecturers, Luise Ørsted Brandt and Anne Birgitte Gotfredsen. Welcome to the studio, both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And Luise, you are Associate Professor at the Globe Institute here at UCPH, where you also got your PhD in prehistoric archaeology. You lead two significant research projects, the project Imported Fur in Viking Age Denmark, where you're examining the use and role of fur and whether it was also used as a status symbol in Viking Age Denmark. You're also the leader of the project Next Generation Lab, which is a citizen science project where you and your colleagues engage with high school students and teach them to identify original archaeological leather and bone from the medieval period and the Renaissance. Both super cool projects.
Thanks so much.
And Gitte, you are a senior researcher also at Globe at the section for geogenetics. You are a zoo-archaeologist and you research quaternary zoology, and you've worked on the faunal history of Greenland, covering the period from around 4,500 BP, before present, to the present time. And you've also researched the husbandry of Danish prehistoric sites, primarily from the Iron Age, Viking Age, and the Middle Ages. And today we're going to be talking all about zoo-archaeology and the archaeology of working with animal remains. So my first question before we really get into it is, what is zoo-archaeology and how would you define it to someone who's maybe never heard of the field?
Okay, I'll start then. Zoo-archaeology focuses on animal remains from archaeological sites. And the faunal remains comprise bones and teeth and antlers, but also, for instance, mollusk shells. And when the preservation conditions for chitinaceous organic matter allows, also horn, hides, and hair, for instance. And zoo-archaeology as a discipline is a truly interdisciplinary discipline, which bridges studies of ancient human societies and animal populations. And the zoo-archaeologists come with a multitude of backgrounds, for instance, archaeology, anthropology, biology as myself, and paleontology, ecology, and a lot of other disciplines. And primarily try to identify and understand the human interactions and also relations with animals and their environment. And from the faunal remains, we can extract samples for proteomic analysis, genomics, and also stable isotopes that I think Luise will talk a little bit about. And we get a more detailed knowledge about humans and their environment, to say it in a short way.
Thank you. So with that established, let's dig deeper. So we've talked a little about what zoo archaeology is, but how does it differ from quote-unquote traditional archaeology?
So bones make up a specific category of archaeological materials. So it's distinct from stones and ceramics. And then it's an organic material. I think Gitte will tell us a little bit more about how preservation interacts with animal bones and other animal materials. So that, of course, means that we are working a lot with preservation bias. But zoo-archaeology also uses a set of specific methodologies for identification and also measuring, which determines the outputs that we can get from our analysis.
And then what can zoo archaeology and a focus on animal remains tell us about past societies and human-animal relations in general?
So I could tell about the analysis of the faunal remains can gain an insight into past diets, for instance, domestication processes, husbandry practices, how you managed your domesticated animals, also hunting patterns, tool usage, and also, of course, ritualistic behaviors, just to mention a few research fields, and thus contributing to a comprehensive view of human environment interactions and also into the subfields of environmental archaeology, actually. And just to say how we go a little further with the demographic profiles of the animals as the sex and age distribution can tell us about for instance, hunting preference and hunting season and hunting methods, and for the domesticated, how they were herding and culling their domesticates. And in another realm, offerings and deposits of animals in bogs, and if the animals are placed in human burials, it also gives an insight into how hunter-gatherers perceived their game animals, for instance, and with the domesticates, how the Neolithic people and later periods were related to their domesticated species, and we get a glimpse of their affectionate relationships between, for instance, the dog and people, but also maybe horses.
Yeah, pets.
And pets, and an insight into their cosmology of prehistoric people. Also, species could give a hint of status that Luise mentioned moments ago, both in graves, as I mentioned, but also on festive banquets during the Middle Ages with, for instance, peacocks and turkeys present, and game animals who was reserved for the elite.
Yeah.
So there are many examples. Also,
In my work, I focus a lot on resource exploitation. So first of all, identifying the species of animal bone, or in my case, often also skin or fur. And then I look at selection. So are people actually interested in using specific species for specific purposes? And this is very often the case because the tissues, for instance, bone tissue or the skin, varies in between different animal species. So with bones from some species are harder than others and maybe better for specific tools. And for skins, some skins are more stretchable or softer. So that gives a functional reason for choosing them. But they may also be beautiful in a way that people have wanted to present. So for instance, in my fur project, there's a lot of variation in the coats of different animal species, and they look very differently in a way that would have been visible to peoples of the past.
Yeah. So in a way to use it as a status marker, right? Yeah. So what does a zoo archaeologist actually do? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but what does your work look like if we start in the field and then later in the lab? Because there are these two sections of the work, I feel.
I start with the field work. I am a biologist, but I have been doing much field work in Greenland and in Denmark together with mostly archaeologists. So in the first place, you actually act as an archaeologist. You excavate, you do the sieving of the soils if it's done. So you are a part of the rest of the crew. And of course, in the field, you are responsible for taking care of the bones, which is an organic material, to ventilate and let them dry in a controlled manner and pack them and get them transported to the lab. And when you are at the lab, you have to have a comprehensive comparative collection or reference collection with many disarticulated skeletons, loose bones, and relevant modern species from the geographical region in question, either Arctic or northern Scandinavian. Different age groups, females, males, and for the domesticates also castrates should be present in the collection, and you actually need more specimens of each category to cover the intra-specific within the species or the specific variation between species. So you have this natural variation reflected in your reference collection. So a reference collection is very, very important to have reliable results. And of course, for scrutinizing small marks on the bones, cut marks, pathology, and so forth, you use a stereo microscope. So you have this identification, and then you have to have a detailed recording and a standardized way of recording the material. And then you go further with your analysis, and maybe Luise have a few things to add on.
Yeah, so maybe not as much anymore, but I used to work a lot in the lab, and now I'm more sort of behind the scene. But in the lab, we normally sometimes we sample ourselves, or sometimes Gitte or her colleagues help us sample bones. And in our laboratories, we do proteomics analysis.
And what's that?
So we extract proteins from animal bones or skins or hairs or antlers or teeth, and we use them for identification. And I can get more into that a little bit later, but we also have labs that deal with ancient DNA, so the building block of our hereditary material, and there are also labs that deal with isotopes. We can talk more about that. So in the lab, we aim at isolating proteins or DNA, depending on the question that we have. And we purify them, so we have the most clean possible extract. And then we send them for sequencing. And for proteins, I work with a method called Zoo-Archaeology by mass spectrometry, and it's very much used for species identification. So what we get is a fingerprint of each animal, and those fingerprints tend to vary between animals, at least animals that are not very closely related. And for DNA, we can talk more about it later, but let's dig deeper into the genomics of the animals.
All right. And one thing that I do want to bring up is a question that I have been asked many times and that I feel I should now present to you as well, which is it true that archaeologists lick bone? Because the last excavation that I was on, we were told that that's a way to distinguish animal bones from pottery shards. You have to lick it to sort of feel whether or not it sticks to your tongue. Is this a method that you use actively in the field still?
I could say, I'm not an archaeologist, but I could say from my part, I don't. But I would guess that some geologists or sedimentologists taste or chew sediments to help identify the sediment type. Okay. But I've never done the way you suppose or suggest.
So you have yet to try that, is what I'm hearing. Sure. Yeah. What about you, Luise? You ever done that?
No, and I don't think I would want to. But I would say that in the lab we get this sort of very subjective feeling of like bone material and would this be good or not for an analysis. Yeah. And it's very hard to describe if you're trying to put that in a paper. It smells this way.
And texture and color and
Yeah, you can't academically describe the taste of a bone, really. That would be hard. Yeah.
But when you take a bone sample, you either use a small saw to chip off a bone, but you can also drill powder. And when you drill the powder, it develops heat and also a smell that is very distinct. And there is a difference in this smell depending on whether the bone is very hard or whether it's more cookie-like.
So you can like taste it in the air in a way.
Yeah, maybe you can say so.
Yeah, okay. That's really fun. In both the fieldwork, but also in the lab work and the categorizing and recording part of it, are there some species that pop up more often than others, or that zoo archaeologists focus on more than others? This is probably something that changes from place to place, right?
Yeah, because it depends very much on the site and the context. So, of course, it's determined by the ecology and the environment of the site, which species are normally present in this area. And then it's also very much determined of like, is it pre-domestication or post-domestication? So I've worked a lot on post-domestication sites and also some more recent sites of the medieval period in Denmark. And here we have a lot of domesticated species like cattle, sheep and goat. Right. So those become very important later. But I know that Gitte has worked on other types of sites.
Yeah, I have, for instance, worked with the Mesolithic sites in Denmark. And if you go to a typical Ertebølle site, you have the three typical species are red deer and roe deer and wild boar. And it depends on which part of the country you are in, which species dominate. But red deer would be a species that occur very abundantly. And if you go to coastal sites in Greenland, it will be dominated by seal species and other marine mammals. So of course it's very well dependent, as Luise said, how the environment and the catchment area around the site.
Yeah. Do you ever find something really surprising, or like a piece of animal bone that's really not supposed to be there, or that an animal bone reveals something interesting about a site?
I was surprised when I made my PhD many years ago, because I looked into the low Arctic, the southern parts of Greenland, avifauna, the bird hunting and bird zoo-geography of birds, because I found in the western part of Greenland, in a very old site, nearly 4,000 years, 3,000 years old site, a Sakrak site, a goose species that I didn't expect. It was a species that was not present in the area today, Western Greenland, but it is a species that we today recognize as a high Arctic breeding goose species, the barnacle goose. And I found it as a breeding bird, actually. So that was a surprise. So it was a zoological surprise to me to find this species at that time and in that region. So that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I think that, it's definitely true that it can totally change our perception of a site. And I have two examples that I want to mention. One is from my PhD, where I investigated the species of the clothing that the Danish bog bodies from the Iron Age were dressed in. And the species were not so surprising, but I went deeper and I found a protein which is found in blood, hemoglobin. But this protein was not only a hemoglobin, it was a fetal hemoglobin. So a hemoglobin that's only expressed in the first 3 months of an animal's life. And this specific protein told us that the skin that this cape was made of was very young cattle skin.
Okay.
So normally we have the perception that skin is a byproduct of meat production.
Yeah, slaughtering and then you use
Exactly,
the skin.
because now it's there and we might as well use it. But this told us that this skin was probably picked specifically because it had these very soft properties. So that was quite surprising, and it made me think about skin as maybe we should think more about it as not just a secondary product, but as
a primary objective for why you breed an animal, perhaps. Yeah,
exactly. The other one that I want to mention is that in my citizen science project, we've analyzed about 3,000 samples from Copenhagen, from the metro excavations of the medieval and Renaissance layers. And what we see there is that we actually have a remarkable portion of horse skin.
Yeah.
And horse is mentioned in written sources as something that you're not supposed to use. It's actually banned. And it comes from a papal letter that describes the tradition of eating horse meat as something very filthy.
Okay.
So after that, horse becomes taboo, and we get this category of people that actually deal with the dead horses.
Right.
We have very few horse bones from city excavations in medieval towns, but it seems that the skins come back somehow. So there is actually a group of citizens that are using this material.
Okay, they're like picking up dead horse skin and then using it.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's like a illegal use of animal
Exactly.
remains, and you can trace that.
Yeah, and it changes our perception of what's actually going on.
Yeah, and how people are subverting the law and bypassing these rules. That's really interesting. Wow.
Paper coming out.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep an eye out for that. What are some of the main challenges with zoo archaeology? I mean, you've already mentioned some of the things like preservation, identification, excavation methods and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's also what I would address, because preservation are really important because it's a organic material. So very simplified calcium-rich gitcha, which is an organic mud, provide good preservation, especially if the layers are sealed with the thick peat layers, which we see in our peat box. Whereas, for instance, sandy soil, rain will just sieve through, would offer poor preservation. So just to take two examples. And of course, the excavation methods matters because, for instance, small bones from fish, small birds, small mammals are only recovered when the sediment are sieved. And of course, we can choose very different mesh size. And with respect to the ID, we have, of course, specific traits on the bones, species-specific traits. And you have to know about which ones are reliable and which ones are not. Especially with these faunal assemblages from archaeological sites, it's a very fragmented assemblage due to marrow fracturing and all kinds of processes that the bones have been through. You have sometimes very few relevant specific traits back, so you will end up with differentiated bones. And then, of course, we have some other methods to help us. And in the last end, you also have to be very specific about how you quantify your fragmented bone assemblage due to this fragmentation and due to this taphonomic problems of preservation that we addressed. So maybe Luise could have a little continuation of this.
Yeah.
Just want to say that for me, one of the most important things that I've learned from zoo archaeology is exactly the taphonomy, so the study of how the original assemblage diminishes through preservation and to the material that we have today because of different factors in the ground and how we excavate them, but also how we quantify them. And I think working with methodologies for identification, as the ZOOMS methodology that I mentioned before, that becomes even more of a problem because now we can actually identify all of the small fragments that don't anymore have some of those species-specific marks that we are looking for. But that also creates a problem because now we are getting a lot more identifications of those fragments, and it sort of boosts the number of identified specimens.
Yeah, so there's a bias.
There is actually a bias created by those natural scientific methods now. Are we just counting more of the same animal because it's fragmented, or are we presenting the original assemblage? So that's very much something that's dealt with.
How do you tackle something like that then?
Yeah, so there are studies, including some at my lab, where we measure the size of the fragments and we correlate that to the species to get a data set that will then tell us if we are like sampling the same animal species. What does it look like when we have fragments of 5 centimeters contra 1 centimeter? Where are we recovering new species, for instance?
So this is still sort of a work in progress, actually.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's something that people have recognized that this is something that we have to deal with.
Yeah, because it's a margin of error, right?
Definitely.
In the work that's a really sort of specific issue that I imagine shows up again and again, actually, right? But how has zoo archaeology changed in recent years? We've talked a little bit about these newer scientific methods like DNA analysis, isotopes, even things like 3D technology. What has changed in that side of things?
Yeah, so some of the methods like isotope analysis has been around for decades, with like carbon-14 dating coming in the 40s, I think. But with newer isotopes such as strontium and sulfur being used for mobility studies, one of the ones that I think have revolutionized zoo archaeology most is the analysis of ancient DNA. And we have the first analysis in 1984 of the quagga, an extinct horse species that looks a little bit like a zebra.
Okay.
But the technology within DNA has also developed so much over the decades. So we begin with trying to get resolution of taxonomic relationships. So how are species and extinct species related? But then with the advent of next generation sequencing, which means that we can actually sequence the entire genome of a species, we've been able to look at population structure, for instance, within a species. So are there different groups distinct from each other?
Yeah.
We've also been able to test some of the morphometric methods that we have normally used for identifying, for instance, sex or subpopulations of species. And we can look at how a species has genetic variation, but also the phenotypes of extinct species. There's, for instance, been studies of the coat color of cattle or horse. And one of the things that I think has also impacted zoo archaeology a lot is the studies of domestication. So how do we distinguish the wild ancestors and the domesticated animals? And can we trace the single domestication events to specific areas? And
okay, is that actually possible to be so specifically to where that process happened?
Yes, so that's been done a lot for sheep, goat, and cattle in the Fertile Crescent.
Okay,
so
wow.
That's very revolutionizing, I would say.
That's very cool. And that's like so many different methods as well. That have evolved through time, right?
Yeah, and I think in proteomics, one of the things that we are seeing right now is that apart from being able to identify unidentifiable remains, we can also sex animals based on tooth enamel. So that's something that's developed within the last 2 years, and now it's exploding.
It's really taking off now.
Yeah, so we'll add to the kill-off patterns that we've been working on for some time.
Yeah, that would greatly improve our ability to have these kill-off patterns, because normally we could say something about the age from the tooth eruption patterns, like with humans, and wear patterns on the tooth or the teeth. But normally we are not able, of course, to identify the individual jaw with teeth in. But when we will be that, we could make some much more precise age demographic profiles on the killed animals. So that will truly improve the field.
Yeah.
And also make us able to understand how the animals have been utilized. So we have those traditional models for, have they been used for meat or for milk or for wool?
Yeah. So you'll be able to say more about that, actually. Can zooarchaeology help us understand things like modern environmental and climate issues? You mentioned things like mobility and migration of animal herds. Is this something that we can sort of perspective onto our time?
I definitely think so, and can sometimes pinpoint human influence with hunting, and in some cases extirpation or at least extirpation of local groups, because you can see the genetic makeup of the different, for instance, walrus populations. So I think to have this understanding on how the animals are in the environment and how they're influenced, it can surely be used for the present or the modern world with the interaction. And I also know that zoo-archaeology is a great potential tool for conservation biology, for instance, especially with the DNA possibilities to see how different species evolved through time.
Yeah.
So you have sort of a past baseline for the species that you can maybe also correlate to temperature changes in the past, and see how the species has reacted to climate change.
Can you use that to sort of, I mean, not to say, but sort of to like predict the future in a way, like see if these patterns will emerge again over time?
Yeah.
I remember a case you brought up in class one time, which was like in Denmark, and it was a pelican that was not supposed to be where it was, but because the temperature had risen, now its food was to be found here. Things like this, is this something that we can use even today to see how the world is changing?
Yeah, and at least give a qualified guess of how the world would change and animals will migrate if they are able to.
Yeah. All right. There are some of my friends who would like to pursue a career more related to zooarchaeology. And so on their behalf, and of my own curiosity as well, I would like to ask if there are some tips that you would have liked to know before going into this field. I mean, you are already an archaeologist by profession, but you, Gitte, you say you're a biologist and you maybe didn't expect to go into the field of zooarchaeology. So what's something that you would have liked to know before you went into this field?
It's actually difficult to say because it was the interest actually for paleontology that brought me into this field. And then I met some that would be my supervisors for my master's thesis. And then it was not paleontology, but it was zoo-archaeology that I specialized in. And I think I never looked back. So I have not thought, well, I would have liked to know that because, it's learning by doing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought that when I started my master thesis and my PhD, which was very much about sheep and the development of sheep wool, I was very interested in humans, and I was like, I have to get back to those humans somehow. But then, over the years, I've sort of realized that I'm working so much with the humans because it's the human-animal interaction that all of those zooarchaeological studies are about, and how people are using animal materials. And I just I've never gotten back to those humans because now
you sort of threw off that human-centric perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Not in the way that I work on human material, at least, because of course I work on human material culture, but I've just realized how important the zooarchaeology is for understanding past human culture. So, yeah.
All right. Well, that is taking us around to the end of this episode. But before I let you go, I would love to know if there's something that you would like our listeners to know about zooarchaeology after hearing this episode. What's a key takeaway that you would give them?
Oh, look out for those animal materials in the field. Some of those organic materials are hard to see, especially the fur and the skin. So they're so important for our understanding of the past. So yeah, look out for them.
Yeah. The first thing is how to excavate and how to behave in the field. And much after that depends on how things are done in the field.
Yeah. So be careful with what you're doing when you're out there. All right. That takes us to the end of this episode. Luise and Gitte, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in to this episode of Let's Dig Deeper. I hope you've learned lots and that you're ready to dig up your own backyard to find some bones. If you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, you can reach us at letsdigdeeperpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is letsdigdeeperpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And please rate us 5 stars so that we can reach more people. You can find us on social media under the name Let's Dig Deeper. I'm Zinat Haroun and I've been your host. You can reach me on Instagram at z_archaeology. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time where we will dig deeper into another topic. Bye!